Let's go back to the story of the Newlands project. The completion of Derby Dam and the Truckee Canal in 1905 helped add more water to the Carson River, and settlers were using flood irrigation to farm the land. But even with more Truckee River water, farmers would still run out of it by late summer. This was a real problem. In 1907, there was too much water. A big flood left several feet of water covering parts of Fallon and the county. The question back then was, how can the river be controlled so there is enough water when it is needed and not too much when it is not needed? We can answer this if you think about this question. If you were preparing to go camping in an area where there was no water, what would you do? Very good. Most people would carry a storage container full of water. And storage is the answer to having enough water when it's needed, but not too much when it's not needed. In 1911, the United States Reclamation Service, known as the USRS, began to build a dam and storage reservoir on the Carson River, on the land that Senator Newlands had sold to the government in 1904. When it was finished, Lahontan Dam would hold back the Carson River water and the new storage reservoir would collect it. It could then be released downstream to the farmers a little at a time. The construction of Lahontan Dam took 3 years. Hundreds of men and work animals used the newest ways to build it: horses and mules pulling wagons, steam shovels, and steam rollers. This steamroller worked to build Lahontan Dam. Although it can't be fired up because the large amounts of hot steam in its boiler can be very dangerous, it can still roll. It only took 3 men and a pickup truck to move it into this building. We are lucky to have such an old piece of equipment in the museum today. Once Lahontan Dam and the reservoir were completed in 1914, farmers were able to begin using the water for their fields. Let's look at the water process. In our area, snow falls on the Sierras, then melts and flows down the Truckee and Carson rivers. Some of the Truckee River water is diverted at Derby Dam into the Truckee Canal, and the rest flows down the Truckee into Pyramid Lake. The water in the canal runs into Lahontan Reservoir, where it joins the water from the Carson River. The water from the reservoir is released into the Carson River and into the main irrigation canals. When the main irrigation canals are full, the water is released into smaller takeout canals and then into the smaller irrigation canals where the farmers open gates to release it onto their fields. The plants drink up the water and the leaves transpire, a process like sweating, and the excess water evaporates into the air. This creates water vapor that condenses into clouds and moves back to the ocean. This water system is one big cycle that repeats over and over again. The ocean water evaporates, forming water vapor that condenses into rain clouds, and the clouds are pushed by winds over the land. Clouds coming from the Pacific Ocean drift east, losing some water over California, but then they hit the Sierra Nevada, where the bottoms of the clouds are torn into jagged shapes as they pass over the mountains. This action dumps a lot of water and snow. The snow melts and runs into Lake Tahoe, the Truckee River, and the Carson River, as well as many other rivers and streams. And around the water goes. Just think, the water that you drink may have been in a lake that an ichthyosaur swam in, or it may have watered an ancient tree at one time. In fact, Water that you use today might wind up in a bottle of water for some little boy or girl 1,000 years from now. Closer to home, there's still more to the story of Lahontan Dam and its reservoir. Even though farmers in Churchill County could now store water for later use, the biggest problem with any desert area is that there is just not enough water. More people moving to an area and bigger cities mean more demand for more water, something that is a limited natural resource in Nevada. Throughout history, major arguments, fights, and even wars have started over water. People have been arguing and fighting in the courtroom over the Churchill River and Newlands project water since the late 1800s, so it is necessary to measure exactly how much water is flowing through these places in order for the water to be divided fairly between the water users. It's a big job to keep track of water use in a large irrigation system like ours. How do you think it's done? In the river and ditches, the water flow is measured in cubic feet per second. Many measuring devices have been invented for this purpose. Let's look at some measuring devices on display in the museum to see how this was done. This one with the little cups could easily be carried by someone to be used to measure water flowing in the ditches. It was placed in the ditch, and the turning cups measured the velocity or speed of the water. The worker used a simple math formula to calculate the cubic feet per second flow. The measuring device with the paper graph was not carried, but sat in one place to provide a constant record. The yellow float sat in a well next to the device, and the tape hanging from it went around the wheel in front. The well was connected to the ditch by a pipe. When the water rose in the well, the wheel turned, causing the pen to write on the paper. This device had to be checked every few days. Another way to measure water use was to send 1 or 2 people out in an open-bottomed barge. They didn't float on the water, but were suspended by a cable over the middle of it. They measured and checked the water from the barge. Would you like to balance yourself over the middle of fast-flowing water to check its depth and speed? These 3 measuring devices aren't used much today because modern electronics allow for even more accurate measurements. Like most things today, these new devices are computerized. Instead of graph paper, a digital recording is downloaded onto a card, like an ATM card, that can be read in the Truckee-Carson Irrigation District office. This office oversees water use on the Newlands project. Even today, with all water use being carefully monitored on the Newlands project, many groups are still arguing over how much each of them should receive of this very limited desert resource. Now that you have seen how our water is used and reused, let's move on to a new section.